Okay, so when and how did you first become aware of John Mack?
Okay, so in 2004, I was still on the New York Times, and I was the Southwest correspondent based in Texas, in Houston. And somehow I picked up a copy of a book called Passport to the Cosmos, which is John Mack's second book. And I'll tell you about John Mack in a minute, because just keeping the chronology, I didn't know who John Mack really was when I picked up this book. And I saw he was a Harvard psychiatrist who had gotten interested in the subject of alien abductions, or the stories that people who consulted him told him about encounters they felt certain they had had with alien beings. So he got interested in that field, and he wrote two books. And as I said, this was the second book that I picked up. And I was immediately, as a journalist, captivated by the idea of a Harvard psychiatrist. And he was a very eminent psychiatrist indeed. I mean, he had won a Pulitzer Prize for a biography of Lawrence of Arabia. He had founded clinics for impoverished people, mental health clinics. He had he had protested against nuclear weapons because as a physician, he was concerned about the fate of the planet, all these things. So he was an interesting guy. And now he had written this book on alien abduction and the stories people told him. So I thought, as a journalist, he would make a good interview. And I thought I would give him a call at Harvard and see if I could interview him. Now, I didn't realize, I was naive probably, that I certainly didn't know he was as well known as he was. As I said, he had won the Pulitzer Prize in 1976 or 77 Pulitzer Prize for book written earlier. And he'd been all over TV with his first book called Abduction. He'd been on Oprah. He'd been everywhere. He'd been in the New York Times, but I had missed it. So anyway, I thought, gee, I'll write a story about this guy. And then I pick up the paper a few days later, and I see he's dead. I mean, he was run down in London by a drunk driver. He was there for a conference on Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence, 30 years after his book had come out. And he was looking the wrong way down the street, which Americans tend to do in London. And he was dead. So I couldn't interview him, obviously, but I did reach out to his family. And it was not a great time for them. Obviously, my timing was poor. They were grieving. But I let them know that I was very interested in his overall story. And I kept in touch with the family, particularly his three sons. And eventually they granted me access to all his archives, his therapy sessions, which he taped, his own therapy sessions, because he, as a psychiatrist, he needed to be analyzed. And he kept up with his own analysis over the years, and his private journals and his unpublished manuscripts and his tapes of every lecture he ever gave. So I had access to a tremendous volume of material, plus interviews with the people close to him. I mean, his wife, Sally, was still alive. She died shortly afterwards of cancer. Colleagues, family members. Anyway, I had access to a tremendous amount of material. And that's what got me going on the book.
From everything that you drew from talking to his family and reading his work and watching his interviews, what kind of guy was he, from what you could deduce?
Well, he was very charismatic. He was mesmerizing. He was tall, very good looking, with a ruddy complexion, very tightly stretched skin. He had a wonderful manner with people, which I guess is the mark of a good psychiatrist. He just got people to trust him and to talk to him. He was brilliant. I mean, his writing is quite apart from, the subject matter, and what he was trying to convey. Just his literary abilities, his gifts as a communicator, were extraordinary. He spoke beautifully in his lectures. He was, very intelligent. So he was a very commanding figure. Was he perfect? Absolutely not. He had suffered a childhood trauma in that his mother died, his birth mother, when he was 8.5 months old. She died of appendicitis. And that affected him all his life. I mean, he was always searching for the missing woman in his life, the missing mother. And so he had some affairs. He was searching for something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It found some outlet in his, search for missing intelligence in the cosmos, perhaps. He said that himself. So he had some girlfriends, and I interviewed them too, by the way. And he was a little naive. He didn't understand how revolutionary his claims were in the rather cloistered, precincts of Harvard, and got him into trouble at Harvard. He wasn't cautious enough in some of his assessments, et cetera, et cetera. But all in all, a very compelling figure, and very well liked, with really many, many friends, and yet some enemies, and people who thought he was a little too smug, a little too smart, and a little too sure of himself. But all in all, I found him a terrific subject, and really worthy of the first full-length biography. Nobody had ever written about him like this before.
Now, was his first book the book on child psychology and nightmares?
That was his first book, yes. He wrote a number of books. One about nightmares, which, by the way, really registered him as an expert on nightmares. Because later on, people said, once he took up the alien abduction phenomenon, people said, well, you don't understand, John. These people are just having nightmares. And he said, in effect, he said, look, I wrote the book on nightmares. First of all, these people, not all these encounters were at night. Some of them were in broad daylight. People were driving, or one case on a snowmobile. People were encountering, having these experiences at all times of the day or night, not just at night. So his interests he ranged widely intellectually. It was only later in his life that he, came across the abduction thing. And like all of us who come across this subject, he was blown away. I mean, how is this even possible that, people are encountering, alien beings? And, the difference is we'll encounter this subject and say, that's interesting, wow. But he decided he was going to make it his career to investigate it. So he was very courageous. I think that's one of his chief attributes. He didn't care what people were going to think, and he didn't care if he was risking his, his professional reputation. He just thought it was a damn good story, and he was going to try to get to the bottom of it.